Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Today I have Dr. Peyton with me. She's a doctor of physical therapy, Evlo instructor, COO of Evlo. And we are talking about weightlifting and exercise for fertility, a common question and a common topic that we get asked. Now, a couple things before we get into the questions for today. So Peyton has her own journey of fertility and IVF, and you have talked about that at length in what episode? I can't remember the number. We can put it in the description.
Yeah, we have a few different ones. We're talking about like my specific journey, and then we talked about PCOS specifically. So we can link
maybe
those.
we'll link all of the episodes that we've done to this point.
Yeah.
But today's episode will just be kind of more general if you are trying to conceive. This isn't about a diagnosis specifically. So this isn't about like if you've been diagnosed with PCOS, here's what to do. It's more just like I'm trying to conceive. I'm trying to increase my chances of conceiving. How do I exercise around that?
Yep, exactly.
And I will also say that we have a big fertility doctor coming on the podcast. We're interviewing her next month. So watch out for that. She has been on, she's amazing.
Yes.
And so that's coming out soon. So we might do a follow-up episode after that, depending on how that goes. So little teaser there. So let's get into this. There's a lot of confusion about if you should exercise when trying to conceive. Should you exercise intensely? Should you weightlift? Should you not weightlift? Someone said weightlifting increases testosterone, so I shouldn't do it. So when it comes to exercise and fertility, what's important?
It's important for us to have this conversation around it because exercise can either help you or hurt you when it comes to your fertility. So it's very, very important that people find the balance that works for them. It is individualized, but we are going to give some really great, just easy guidance to follow today that falls within the current research that we have on things, which is pretty slim pickings. But it's very important to have this conversation because it does have an effect on your fertility in both positive and negative ways. So that's why we wanted to talk about it today.
I love it. So how can it have a negative effect?
So exercise can be one of the things, so from a negative perspective or from detracting from your fertility, a lot of the research is centered around cardio specifically. There's not a lot around weightlifting in general, but especially when it comes to like the negative or the negative impacts of exercise. So with exercise and with looking at cardio, the more vigorous activity that someone does, and that's described as 77 to 95% of heart rate max is vigorous activity in this particular study. The more vigorous activity someone has, the less likely they are to conceive. And this is in a just completely healthy person, no other diagnoses. And it's shown to the point of 2 hours of vigorous exercise per week can have a deleterious effect.
That's it?
Yeah. Yes. 2 hours of vigorous.
Because some people are exercising vigorously every single day for an hour.
Yes. So the more, and it's a correlation as you go up in that vigorous. So 3 to 4 hours goes up to a 16% chance. I think 2 hours is the 16% chance less likely to conceive.
Okay.
And then a sedentary person, 3 to 4 hours a week goes up to 27% chance of less likelihood of conceiving, and then greater than 5 goes up to 32% less likely than a sedentary individual. That's comparing those two.
Wow.
As opposed to moderate exercise, which we'll get into with the benefits, it is very clearly shown that more and more vigorous exercise can take away from our fertility.
Yeah. So if someone is not tracking their heart rate, they're just thinking of like exercise modes or types. What would that be?
So the idea is it's an activity that causes like very intense sweating, which obviously that can be very individual too, intense sweating, but can only say like 1 or 2 words during the activity is a good barometer. But that would be something like a HIIT class that's going on for 45 minutes to an hour, where you're getting more into like zone 3, zone 4 cardio, or a high intensity spin class that's extended. And it's those extended levels where your heart rate is just going, and there's not much time for variation or coming back down. that would be classified as that vigorous activity.
Potentially even some like hot heated classes. Like I think about some of the classes that I used to teach that, you know, if they weren't heated, they might not feel so intense and vigorous, but the fact that they're heated on top of doing the yoga and or weights or whatever, cardio, then it becomes vigorous.
Yeah.
So I think like you could look at it as heart rate. You could look at it as like how many words you could say. You could look at it as like perceived exertion.
Yes.
Like, are you really
high on that perceived exertion chart?
High on perceived exertion.
Yeah. And it's the reason why I think that this is the case and why they speculate it too within the research that we do have is our energy expenditure. So while we talk and have talked about extensively of there does seem to be a cap on energy expenditure, a lot of the research is around high level athletes, which it is shown in research that they do have different adaptations or can have different adaptations from an energy expenditure, how much they are burning in their individual activities. And so it's likely that there is an imbalance between this energy expenditure, that you're expending way more than is sustainable for fertility. Because fertility is going to be one of the things that our body says, well, this isn't a need to have to keep me alive. So if we're having to downregulate things to try and keep our energy expenditure as balanced as possible, it makes sense that that would be something that would be impacted.
Right. Yeah. It's like your body's probably going to prioritize other things over your fertility if energy is low overall.
Exactly. And it's because we see it in how it kind of a physical manifestation is interruptions or disruptions to menstrual cycles. So people and athletes commonly talk about losing their cycles. So it's like, yes, they are these high level athletes, but a lot of them are losing their cycles. So that of course is going to impact your fertility, because if you're not having a cycle, you're not going to be able to conceive, or that's going to have a major impact. Because you have to be ovulating in order to conceive.
Right. And I think even just fitness enthusiasts, we hear from a lot that are like, I lost my cycle from just exercise, just like going to fitness classes, like 7 days a week. So it's not necessarily like I'm competing in sports that is that you could be vulnerable to this at any level. Really.
Absolutely. Yeah. This is not just reserved to high level athletes. They just have a lot of data and a lot of research around those women specifically.
Right. So speaking of cycles.
Yes.
I think the next logical question is, well, then should we cycle sync?
Yeah, so again, not a ton of great data, but the data that we do have from cycle syncing. So this idea of changing the type of exercise that you're doing based on the different phases of your menstrual cycle. The data that we do have suggests that there is not enough of a generalizability. There we go.
You got it.
Can't make it. There's not this ability to make things like so general amongst every woman, essentially.
Yeah.
Our cycles are all really specific and really unique. And so there is not great data to support changing your exercise for different phases in order to produce a better outcome from a fertility perspective. Now, I think some positives around cycle syncing, or the cycle syncing movement, is getting more in tune with your body, is listening to your body, is becoming more aware of your cycle in general. Because I know that that's not something that I was super aware of growing up. And so I think that that's an element of it that could be helpful when you're trying to conceive, is using some type of tracking system, or whether that's an electronic, like an Oura Ring partnered with an app, or using a manual writing system of tracking it. I think that that can be really helpful in giving you information of, am I ovulating? Am I having these different phases of my cycle that are necessary to support fertility? But changing and having that variation in your fitness routine to such an extreme level, like weightlifting for 1 week and then only doing yoga for another and then only walking for another, is going to leave a lot of room for inconsistency, which we know is not beneficial for supporting our overall systems.
Right. So maybe a better approach is like, get in tune with your body, start tracking your cycle, stay consistent with a routine, And we can talk about like weightlifting and stuff here in a
Yes.
second, but stay consistent with a routine, but use some auto regulation. So like if you're
Yes,
not feeling
correct.
the best, like maybe that's a day that you take it down a notch, whether or not you are like on your period or
Yes.
premenstrual or
Exactly.
whatever. It's like, cause sometimes some people feel horrible when they're on their period. I feel like that's my best week, like
Right.
physically from an exercise performance standpoint. So what may work for one person may not work for the other person, for somebody else. So I think it's more about individualized auto-regulation,
Yes.
staying consistent, and then within that consistency, like ramping it up or down depending on how you're feeling.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. And I think it's important to say that it doesn't necessarily cycle syncing because I like to talk about cycle syncing in the context of like being overall healthy and
Yes.
like continuing to see yourself progress from a fitness standpoint. But you're also saying that for fertility, it's not necessarily more beneficial.
There's no data to support
No
that it's
data.
more,
Okay.
that it's more beneficial.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So how can exercise support fertility?
So in that same study that looked at the vigorous exercise, it also, of course, looked at moderate exercise. And even just a couple hours of moderate exercise can increase your chances of fertility. So it's this interesting balance of we don't want it to be too much, but also having some exercise is shown to be extremely beneficial. And supporting, and it's shown that exercise is helpful because it supports our ovarian function, which is obviously important for fertility. And then also if we're talking about strength training specifically and weightlifting specifically, we know that the increase in muscle mass has a positive effect on insulin, which has a positive effect on every system in our body, including our fertility and including our reproductive systems.
Yeah. So moderate cardio and weightlifting.
Yes. So it's funny because in that review, they only talk about weightlifting in the PCOS population. They don't talk about it for the general person. They are only talking about cardio. But I think that we can infer based on what we know of weightlifting and the impact of increasing muscle mass and what it can do for our metabolic flexibility and for our metabolic health. And increasing our metabolic health is going to have a direct impact on our reproductive system.
Right. Whether or not you've been diagnosed with PCOS
Yes.
or something else.
Exactly.
Yeah. Love it.
Exactly.
Awesome. So any other guidelines to support fertility as far as exercise? Like, do we have specific, like how much of each exercise should somebody be doing?
Yes. So when we're looking at this, I think it's very important to when finding that balance, this would be our recommendation. So prioritizing strength training, that's going to be your cornerstone and your pillar. So especially if you're in a phase where you've got a lot of stress, which a lot of people who are trying to conceive are in a phase of life where they've got careers, they have a lot of stuff going on at home, they have all these things, and then trying to conceive on top of it, whether you have an issue or not, like that can add a layer of stress. So a lot of times in that time period, your actual time is limited. So prioritizing strength training as the cornerstone, just like we would recommend really for any population or any group, is where you want to start. Now within that, you want to pick options in strength training options that aren't going to be overall systemically fatiguing. So prioritizing more isolated lifts as opposed to these big compound movements that have the goal of like getting your heart rate going and getting your heart rate up. Now it's not wrong or bad or negative for your heart rate to increase. Obviously our heart rate increases during Evlo classes, especially lower body work. But choosing more isolated lifts and having it be, not hours and hours of string together compound movements is going to be your best bet for keeping your systemic fatigue a little bit lower and just focusing on that muscle fatigue from that standpoint. And then also within your strength training sessions, really utilizing your warm-ups and your cool downs. Again, this is something we recommend for everyone, but it's especially important for people who are wanting to conceive. So starting the class, the warm-ups are just a great place to just get connected. Again, that's for anyone, but really the cool downs are where you want to shine and where you want to make sure that you're not skipping them at all. So once you've done your lifting, you want to make sure that you're giving yourself a dedicated time to separate out that workout from the rest of your life and the rest of your day. So taking time to take just some easy, gentle mobility, and then also Shavasana, or just a moment of silence, a moment of breath work at the end, can allow you to come back into that parasympathetic nervous state so that you can both accurately recover from the class or from the work that you've just done, as well as you're bringing your nervous system back down to earth in general during this time period.
Which we often don't do.
No.
Ever.
No. And it's more important than ever when you're trying to conceive to have that ability to come back down to earth from a nervous system perspective. It's not bad to tap into your sympathetic. We need that in our workouts and in just life. Sometimes it happens, but that ability and that dedicated time, really, that at least you know that after the lift or after what you've done, that you're going to give yourself some time to bring it back down to earth, I think is especially important in this population.
Right. Because I think when you think about the benefits of meditation, like they're incredible. But if you're like, some people get so intimidated by, I got to meditate and I got to work out. It's like if you build it into your workouts, let's say you're on the Evlo 5 time per week track, you're doing a few minutes at the beginning, a few minutes at the end. Let's say you're getting, conservatively 3 minutes.
Right.
So that's 15 minutes a week total of like meditation and mindfulness that you might not be getting at all.
It can make a huge impact.
Especially consistently.
Yes.
And consistently trying to regulate your nervous system. And it is a practice. It's hard for a lot of people to slow down mentally, but it gets easier. And so that just goes to show that you can train it, which is really cool.
No, it is really cool. So that's your cornerstone. And then, of course, we recommend 150 minutes of cardio additionally. And that's for anyone, but in this population too. But I think keeping it when you're in this population, keeping it to things that you really enjoy is just going to be mentally nicer to yourself. So go on walks with friends. Have that incorporated into your schedule, or with your dog or with your partner or whoever it is, and incorporate more. Use this kind of as your enjoyment time.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, and using it as time for conversation, because this should not be something that's overly intense to where you can't have a conversation. It's just easy, light to moderate, and again, that's showing to be beneficial for fertility.
Yeah, this is like your fun movement, or like if you
like to dance. Yeah. I'm not as good at the dancing, but I like
do that
it
behind closed doors for sure.
Yes, so that's not going to be with friends for me, but it is still just something that's going to make you laugh. That's something that's silly, something that's fun can be incorporated here.
I love that
in like a really low pressure way. And then if you are recovering really well from all of that and you enjoy HIIT or a little bit of high intensity, I think max of one HIIT session per week, and it be 15 minutes or less. So staying well beyond that number of that 2 hours of vigorous activity that is shown to potentially take away from fertility.
Here's a question. It's almost like if this is a temporary time period in your life where that is the main goal, is trying to conceive, do you think it's really even worth it to put the HIIT in, or is that something you just hold off on?
I don't personally, so I would hold off, but I know that I'm not someone who's ever craved HIIT, so that's not hard for me it's not hard for me to say goodbye to it.
Same.
But if you're someone who it's like you're used to doing an hour a day of more high intensity, maybe not true HIIT, but just higher intensity boot camp type classes, taking it away fully might feel really daunting. So giving yourself that one time per week, 15 minutes or less, to just give your effort there, and then let the rest of it be more moderate and be more intentional from a strength training and just easy, gentle cardio perspective, I think could be a good maybe middle ground for someone.
I love this. Okay, anything that we missed that you want to add?
No, I'm just excited for more conversations to come about more specifics in the past or in the future, but we just wanted to give everyone just a little easy reference to come back to that's just general and easy to follow.
Awesome. I love it. Thank you, Peyton.
Yay, you're welcome.
We will see you all next week. Same time, same place. Bye for now.